Hey there, I'm Joe Weems. Before we get into the video, I want to remind you about ng-conf 2023 happening in Salt Lake City, Utah on June 14th and 15th. Head over to ng-conf.org to check out the speakers, check out the talks, and to get your ticket before they all sell out. We'll see you there.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about form validation done right. That's a polite title. It's really, you're doing it wrong, and I'm here to save you. Yeah. So I did this kind of talk last year for ng-conf, and it was all about how reactive forms, no, template-driven, yes. And 1 year later, it's still true. Everything I told you is true. Everything you know, you've been told about reactive forms is not true. You know that already. But let me sort of summarize the talk a little bit. You may remember that this is what you do in reactive forms. And I hear that there are a lot of people here who are really excited about type safety in here. Is there anybody here who thinks that's great? Of course you do. You want to know how I feel? Like, why? All right? Because I don't need the type safety. There's nothing to write. There's no type safety needed. Why are we working so hard? Put this in your brain. Why are we working so hard to do something that we shouldn't be doing? So I claim. Well, I'm carrying on that idea here. The theme then was really write less, do more. The theme today is write less, do more. I hope you'll say it with me at some point. But let's talk about validation. And I just put together a little screen here. It's got 3 rows, 2 controls in the top, 2 rows in the second, 1 in the shorty in the third. And how would you like to write the template for that? What would you like that to look like? At the end of the talk, it will look like this. It's got, you can see it, 3 rows, 2 controls in the first, 2 controls in the second, 1 control in the end. You can figure it out. There's no sign of validation. There's no sign of binding. There's no sign of form control. It's got only what you need to write the form. That's where we should go. Oh yeah, no code in the class. All right, so validating user input, hey, I think we know what that means. You know, you type in something, and if it says it's required, you better put it in, or it'll tell you there's a problem. You know, if you only do that once, not a big deal, but if you write big forms over applications, like I've been doing forever, you can't rely on the out-of-the-box custom validation. You've got to write your custom validations, you've got to rely on them, and if you don't get it right, somebody doesn't get paid. All right? So it's no fooling. So let's all together write a form validation validator the way we've been taught. So we start with a validator function. I don't remember what the syntax of that is because, of course, it's a function that returns a function that returns errors. And so I look it up, and then I go fill it in. And if I'm reactive, I'm saying, well, at least I'm done. But if I'm template-driven, I've got to go write a validation directive. And I don't remember how to do that, but there's a sea of yellow telling me all the routine things I have to do. And then I have to go find the thing, my template, and I put that attribute on there, and I've done one validation rule. And if I want any more, I do the same thing. Now this to me strikes as a lot of pain. If I've got over 100 custom validations, what am I doing? What am I doing? Writing one validator per validation rule. Writing one validation directive per validation rule. Writing one attribute onto decorating this thing crazy with this. And we haven't even gotten into how hard it can be to write a complex validation. Well, there's a first principle of engineering, and it says when you have an unnecessary requirement, get rid of it. And I'm here to tell you, it's not needed. You may never write a validator again. All right? Yeah, that's what I want to hear. Okay, but there's a deeper problem, and that is that our architecture is wrong. We're trying to do validation in the UI, and that's not where it belongs. All right, let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so, we know how to do this. I just showed it to you, but you've got an add company button, and you press that button, and it takes you someplace. And what if the name of the company is not on the form where you happen to go? Do you know whether that's valid or not? Is that valid? How do you know that the whole thing is not valid because there's no legal name there? If you don't visit the form, all right, you don't know about it. A tree fell in the forest and you don't know. Let's take it up a notch. Okay, right. So let me back up and say, is that form valid? Is that model valid? No. Is the form valid? It says it is because you didn't go there. So it's not really valid. So let's go up a little bit. Let's suppose my company is moving from California to Utah, for tax reasons or because it's too costly. Or I don't know why people are doing that, but they are. And when I do that, though, this is a payroll application, and when I do that, the taxes on every employee change. Okay? There's nothing on this form about taxes. So what we've actually done is invalidated the model, but we've done it on two forms that we haven't even gotten to. We don't even know that they are there. All right? Is this form invalid? No, it's not. All right? You can't invalidate something if you don't put something on there to validate. Can you block the user from leaving? No, that makes no sense. They've got to be able to change the address. You can't stop them from doing that. They couldn't fix it if they wanted to. You can't warn them because validators don't have a warning feature. They have an errors feature. They don't know what to do to fix it. They don't know where to go. And even if you told them, they might not go there. And if they don't go to the form, you don't know that it's invalid. The model is invalid. So let's just pretend that this is not a problem. You may be able to do that, but I can't do that, okay? In fact, what I do is want to create a great validation experience. So when the people navigate higher to this navigation screen, this dashboard, I want to be able to give them visual clues about what's good and what's not, so that they can drill into places where they can complete the deal. Oh, and I might want to have a review page where I can summarize all the things that are right or wrong about the model, and they can click on something and it'll take them there. And when it takes them there, why don't I give them a panel on the right-hand side, so as they march through the things they have to fix, the application takes them from one place to the next. Isn't that what they want? Well, I don't know about you, but that's what I do in my application. This is real. All right. So, can you do that with UI validators? Matamba says, no, 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 no. All right. We got to do something about that, and something we're going to do about that is called model validation. By model, I'm talking about the whole domain that your user application is interacting with, which in our example, which is a payroll application, is everything that the company is trying to set up about paying all of their employees. And you cannot do that on one form, okay? It's distributed over a whole bunch of forms in a whole bunch of places. So all the logic, all the logic about the model, which is this whole thing that the user is interacting with, we have to worry about. And so in this architecture, it's the model that sets the rules, not the UI. It's the model that knows the employee name is required, not the UI. It's the model that knows that when you change the work state, the taxes change. It's the model that knows that if you change the type of the employee to a 1099 contractor, you don't have to pay taxes, you don't have to cover their taxes at all. All right? And moreover, once we have this, and let's suppose we composed all of these rules at the model level, we want to be able to cover the gamut of things that our application should do in terms of validation. So sure, we want to expose it at the field level, and sure, we want to expose it at the form level, but we also, as we saw, want to expose it at the domain level in a myriad of ways. All right? And we want one set of rules to do that. And we don't want to run away to some validator functions to talk about it. So let's talk about what model validation might look like in Angular. And I assure you You see, a lot of times you come in here with a solution, and now you got to say, okay, I'm going to be sweating bullets. There's a whole bunch of stuff I have to do. But what if I told you that the solution I'm going to offer you is actually easier than if you do it the way you've been taught? As a matter of fact, the first time you write a custom validator is the first time you should switch over to this approach, because it will be easier for you. All right, so there are 3 elements to this model validation solution. The first is we put the validators aside, we need some way of expressing validation rules that's really comfortable for us, and we need that something to be able to execute, deliver the judgment about whether something is valid or not. And this is Angular, and so let's integrate whatever we choose for a validation engine right into Angular so that we do get the benefit of what Angular does offer us in terms of exposing errors. And then we want to look at it and say, all right, but man, there's a lot of junk here. Let's see how much of it we can get rid of. And I call that solution application widgets. So we're going to do those 3 things. The first thing is the validation engine. Now, we wrote our own, and before this talk, I was worried I was going to have to show it to you because it's awful. I'd hate to say it, but it works, and we know it, but I was saying, oh man, how are we going to explain this? And then I went to WebRush, the podcast you should go through every Thursday. And in that, we had a guest who had this solution for this problem. And he had done it for React and Vue and one of those other ones. It's escaping me. But he didn't know Angular, and he had no idea how he was going to tie it in Angular. And I said, I know how, and I've got this talk coming up. And his name is Evyatar Alush, and he wrote this library, and I've been using it as my validation engine and my validation rules for months now, and I am ready to say, yeah, go do this. Don't write it yourself. He's maintaining it. It's beautifully documented. He cares. Great guy. Use it. You'll see what I mean in a second. So I have to compose a validation rule, right? Custom validation rule. And I don't know what this looks like to you, but let's see if we can figure it out together, okay? So there's that word test there. Man, that looks a lot like an it. And that's probably the property. Oh, here's that message that, I usually say an it is about this thing. Yeah, that's good. Enforce. Boy, there's a word that I use somewhere that's kind of like expect. And then there's the value, and then, oh man, there's a whole kit full of expectations. A library of them all canned for me. Maybe it's even extensible. That looks a lot like, tell me what it looks like, people. Thank you, unit test, right? Yes, and we know how to do unit tests, so I don't really have to explain to you what that looks like. And what do you do with unit tests? Do you write one of them? No, you don't. You create a suite of them. It's the suite validations. And of course, when it comes time to write another validation rule, do you go back to your validators and write a validator function? Yeah, of course you do, because you love to code, but I don't. So I write more unit tests, all right? And I create suites of these. And they're all together. And so when I want to know how my application validates, I know where to look. I don't have to run around to 200 components and wonder, what validator are you on? All right? It's here. I can write unit tests on my unit test, by the way. All right. So I have a great way of expressing it. I got to be able to execute it wherever and whenever I need it in my application. And that's not that hard, right? We had that. It's a function that wraps these things, and I throw some stuff into it. I'm not going into what the stuff is. And I say, go do it. And then I say, give me the errors. And then I do whatever I want to do with those errors. Okay? But there's an async version, but you don't care. So here's another thought. I go to all this work of writing all these validation rules, but I do this all on the server. On the client. But when you do validation on the client, that's for user experience. That's not the real guardian of your data. The guardian of your data is on the server. That's where you do data integrity. And why, oh why, would I write one set of rules on the server and another set of rules on the client? I don't have to. I can do validation as a service with a server. Think about it. So this is step 2. We got our Angular, we got this apparatus, we want to plug in. We want to tap in to the form control validator system. It's really simple. I'm going to create a super validator that calls vest, and then I'm going to have a way to run around to all the controls and put that validator everywhere that you have a form control. How hard can it be? Well, it ain't that hard. All right, I'm going to show you a validator function. This is the super function, right? I don't remember the structure, so I have to go look it up again. And okay, that's kind of it. All right, I get the control value that just changed, and I had this model that I was binding to. Yes, I am talking to you about template-driven forms. And then I smush them together, and then I call. We just learned how to call the validation suite, and I call the validation suite, and one of the things I give it is the field, the property. And so it knows inside this validator that I'm not evaluating the entire model, I'm validating this property, the one that your control is bound to. And so it doesn't execute everything, it just executes that part of your suite. Nice. And then I expose it. All right? Now, there was that other stuff I had to get in there, so it's a factory thing. But, you know, and I do all this stuff where I can get all this other stuff, and that's not important today. Just know it works. And I make an async validator that's just like it. And these are the only two validators you will ever have in your application. How do I know that? Because they're the only two validators in my client's application. And I wrote them. You don't write them, although I'm going to give you the code. And so, as I said, you may never write a validator again. Thank you. So now we have this problem, though. We got to kind of connect the dots. I got the validator function, but I got to get it into the control somehow. How am I going to do that, particularly if you're a template-driven forms fan like I am? And oh, it turns out it's kind of sweet. You see, there's that ng model up there. Well, behind the scenes, that's an ng model directive. And what does an ng model directive do? I know you've all wondered this. It creates a form control of its own that connects to that HTML element. And if it's going to do that, well, then I can write my own directive, right? And that directive can go find that ng model directive because it uses the selector that says, hey, I'm going to go look for the ng model attribute. And when it does it, it grabs it and it pulls out the form control and it goes in there and stuffs those two validators into it. And Viola, you have it hooked up. And do you ever see this thing? No. Because the way the selector works, it's going to find it for itself, and I am not going to have to put that attribute on anything. So we're back to the theme. I'm writing less. We, the application developers, are writing less, and we're getting a lot more from writing less. Okay, so there's still some of this crud lying around, because you may vaguely recall that I had to pass some information. I got to know what the model is, where that has the data. I kind of got to know which validation suite, because I wrote a lot of them, which one applies here. So, and I don't want to keep saying that over and over again, because I hate saying things over and over again. So I have a validation scope directive. And so here's where I say, hey, this is the model object. When you look for that first name or legal name, you'll find it on that. And here, this is the name of the suite I want you to run. All right? And I can create multiples of these suites of validation functions. I don't have to have one uber one, but I just have to name it, and I go find it. And when I do that, now I can drop in there, and the only thing I have to say is the property I'm binding to, which I have to say anyway, because I have to relate the input control to a data property. I'm going to say that anyway, but I don't have to say all this other stuff. And let's suppose I'm a good programmer, and I take this gigantic form and I carve it up into, component forms. That same scope's going to penetrate all the way down. So I'll never, ideally, I might never have to mention this again. But believe me, it's called a scope because you can have multiple scopes. So if you need it, you can. But basically, you get the idea. Say as little as necessary. And that's cool. But I still have all this boilerplate left. And I hate that. I hate boilerplate. So, that's boilerplate, the errors, that's boilerplate, that's the class, this is boilerplate. It's specific to my Angular material stuff, but it's over and over again. So, repeat after me, please. Write less, do more. All right? That's our mantra. And so I want to take all this stuff and I want to boil it down to that. That's all I want to have to write. Maybe I have to write a little bit more occasionally, but that's what I want to write. And it's all because I wrote widgets, which are components. This one's called input text. You know, in your application, you probably have 5 sort of modalities, patterns of taking input that you use over and over and over again. You put the investment into 5 widgets, and you'll be writing code like this. And that means when you're back to that work address again with the 3 rows, and it'll look like this without the widgets, and it's an eye chart, and you don't want to see it, you're back to this. The minimum you have to say, and there's no code. Get the goods. Get the goods here. The deck will be available to you. Everything is in there, including the validator directives and stuff like that that you could absolutely use everywhere, anywhere. The rest are sort of teaching examples. And you'll end up right here writing less and doing more. Thank you. I am Ward Bell, and see me around.